Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm JT Takagi, and I'm glad you could join us tonight for a talk about the film Land of Azaba, which we hope you've seen already. If you did not get to see it yet, you can still register up through midnight tomorrow to see it during the next week. And I'll put the link into the chat towards the end of this talk. Some housekeeping notes about this webinar. The audience is muted and off camera. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to post your questions for the panelists. If you keep your chat window open, you'll see additional posts about our speakers. I now hope you will join me in acknowledging that in New York, we are on the unceded territory of the Lenni Lenape, Canarsie, Shinnecock, and Munsee peoples. We acknowledge and challenge the harm that continues to be inflicted upon Indigenous and people of color communities here and abroad, which is why we all need to be part of the struggle for rights, equality, and justice. I would like to now introduce the director of the documentary forum at City College, which is the host of tonight's event, filmmaker and professor Andrea Weiss.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event. And thank you, JT, for that, all the amazing work you've done on behalf of the Documentary Forum, and not just for tonight's program, but throughout the year. I want to thank the Rifkin Center for the Humanities and the Arts and the Provost's Office, Year of Sustainability, for supporting tonight's program. And in the interest of transparency, full disclosure, I'm the co-producer of the film we're about to talk about tonight, The Land of Azaba. I'm also the co-director of the MFA program in film. I wear several hats. I'm also the director of the Documentary Forum. The Documentary Forum is dedicated to supporting and encouraging the creation, exhibition, and study of documentary film. Documentary sits at the nexus of the arts, the humanities, the sciences, and the social sciences. It's an invaluable vehicle for creating a more culturally informed, engaged, and integrated citizenry. With its fundamental tenets of freedom of expression and public access to information, documentaries play a crucial role in preserving an open and informed society. So please be sure to check out our website, documentaryforum.org, and our calendar of events. And now I would like to introduce Jane Tillman Irving. Jane Tillman Irving spent most of her career as a reporter and news writer for WCBS AM in New York City, where she won more than 30 awards for outstanding news coverage. She graduated from the City College of New York in 1969 and is president of the New York Press Club and the president of the Communications Alumni Group of the City College Alumni Association. And we will put her longer bio in the chat. Jane, you there?
I'm here and I'm delighted, and in full disclosure, I see you can't see me. Now you can see me. In full disclosure, we, the Communications Alumni Association of the City College, Communications Alumni Group of the City College Alumni Association, are the co-sponsors of this event, and we hope this will be the beginning of many collaborations with groups on campus. This is a wonderful documentary, The Land of Azaba Earth by Greta Schiller, and we are delighted to be co-sponsors. I want to tell you a little bit about the Communications Alumni Group. We represent telling the story in all its forms: print, radio, television, public relations, advertising, film, everything you can, internet, all of the ways that people communicate. And we hope that when you graduate, you will join the Alumni Association, and that you will recognize that there is a place within that larger Alumni Association, among its many affiliate groups, for you here with us at the Communications Alumni Group. And now I want to introduce tonight's moderator, Esther Tolkoff, class of 1968. She's been a reporter for a number of publications, and she's done it in the most challenging way of all, as a freelancer. She's written for Backstage and TheRoot.com and all kinds of publications in between. She's also been the editor of the City College Alumnus. And Esther knows film, which is why we asked her to moderate tonight's panel. So moderating the panel, introducing our panelists on Greta Schiller's film, The Land of Azar, here's Esther Tolkoff.
Okay, there I am, yes. Well, happy Earth Day, everybody. That's what brings us here. We have with us a bunch of excellent CCNY, that's City College of New York, if you haven't guessed it by now, people who have dedicated their tremendous talent and energy to the causes of climate change and biodiversity. And I would like to introduce our panel to you before we see a little bit of and talk about the wonderful documentary Jane referred to. Okay, here is Greta Schiller, first of all, who is the director. Greta, are you there? There we go. Greta has won Emmys. She is a member of the Communications Alumni Hall of Fame. You can look at your programs to see the long list of credits and awards that all of our panelists have. But this film is her thing, and we'll see it and we will talk about it. Next, I'd like to introduce Ana Carnaval, who is a scientist, a professor at City College, a professor of biology, and an expert in biodiversity, which we'll be talking a lot about. And then we have the Stuart Z. Katz Professor of English, Emily Raboteau, who is a wonderful creative writer who is with the Masters of Fine Arts Department of Creative Writing at City College and has devoted a lot of her writing the past couple of years to biodiversity, climate change, and everything related to that. And we're all here on Earth Day. The first thing we'd like to do is see a bit of Greta's film. And I will pass the baton over to her and let her explain to you what her goals are, what she'd like you to see in what you're going to see right now. Greta, take it away.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for everyone who's zoomed in and to the panelists who I've never met in person, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. We decided to screen the first 10, although most of you, I hope, have watched the film. I decided that it would be a good idea to screen the first 10 minutes to set the tone. And the film, the whole idea of what I was trying to do with the film is rather than do like a hard-hitting man telling you what's happening and talking about whatever's going on screen and dramatic music, I wanted to like seduce you into a magical landscape and make you, when you came away, you felt like you had been to the land of Azaba. So we opened the film with the shots of the landscape that you drive from Madrid to the location where I shot the film, where you see the devastation of modern farming. And then we meet the central character, and then we'll come back for discussion. So take it away, JT.
Well, there's a glimpse of the world of Azaba, the name of the film, as you mentioned before. And obviously, it's quite a different world from those of us here at City College in New York. So I would like to ask Greta how she discovered Azaba, what inspired you, Greta, to research this film? How did you find out about Azaba? What went into this? What was the passion that drove you to get this beautiful?
It's funny, since it's Earth Day, I remembered that when I was in, I think it was junior high, the first Earth Day that Murray Bookchin organized was at the University of Michigan, and I went to that. So you could say I started this film in childhood. But I had made a short film on Long Island about a community restoration of a freshwater lake called the Marion Lake Story. And that's how I first heard about the concept of earth restoration and observed a very small scale relative to this one. And then I wanted to do something more. I loved the topic. I thought it was just fascinating. And I like the idea of hope and resilience, that despite all the crap human beings have done to the earth, the same hands can do something to heal it, which isn't to say it's okay to destroy it and then repair it. It's like a building is torn down and rebuilt, but it's still the idea that something can be done. So I started doing a lot of research on the web and intensive reading on the subject and the philosophy of what it was. And at first I was interested in this rewilding concept, but then I became more interested in the restoration, which is, a fine distinction in some people's eyes. But one thing about restoration is that the idea is that humans are part of the ecosystem, that humans cannot be just taken out of the ecosystem in the way that, like, we created national parks and whatever. So in April of 2014, I went to Spain and went to the location with a camera woman and a production assistant. And we went for 3 days, and I just filmed sample scenes and just observed and got it. And my Spanish isn't very well, so I could observe, which actually was in a weird way an asset, because I could just observe what was happening. And one of the key scenes in the film, the vulture scene, which Carlos is in the vulture hide, was filmed at that time. So I used something, and then I went back like 4 other times to film.
Well, one thing I was wondering was how you heard about Azaba, of the many places in the world that one
Yeah.
could pick to go to.
Well, I for some reason I wanted to do it in Spain. I lived in Spain the previous year, and I wanted to do something in Spain, and so I just did research and looked at different possibilities, and that one I got the bug, and I thought, I'm gonna go check this place out, and I did.
What is it? I gather that there are things that are different, that this is the only place in Western Europe that has many of the characteristics that you were looking for. Can you tell us?
Well, I just wanted to find a place where the people were passionate and believable, and that they wouldn't mind me hanging around with a crew and just being there, and I became like one of the animals on the location. It was hilarious. They almost didn't even really notice me after a while. And so, there are a lot of the Society for Ecological Restoration. Actually, if you go on there are many restoration projects in the world now, but this one was the one. I can't exactly tell you why, because I don't know, but I loved it. I met Carlos. I loved Carlos. We couldn't really speak together, but our hearts always beat in sync. And so it seemed like the place to make the movie.
Okay, I'd like to ask some of our other panelists. I'd like to quote Emily. Is Emily there? Yes. You have written a great deal for the New York Review of Books, and I loved an expression used in one of your articles, that we were losing the earth through human folly, which is what Greta was just saying in the film. I was just wondering what your reaction was as you watched that.
Oh, first of all, I want to congratulate Greta on this really beautiful film. It was such a treat to watch it today for Earth Day. We all just saw the opening, and it's very alarming, when you have this aerial view of land that's been overgrazed looking like that. It's so stark, and the music that you chose is, it starts to make you really, I think, appropriately concerned. And then the movie shifts and says, but there is another way. And then the movie is largely about this other way, dedicated to the real exploration of what it means to restore, what we've done to the earth. And I did, if your intention, as you said, Greta, was to transport us to this kind of magical realm, and Azaba sounds like it's such a magical word. It really worked on me, Yet I also thought, even though it's a very visual medium, the sound in this film is so beautifully done. You could close your eyes and hear, 20, at least 20 different species. The ones that come out at night, the insects, the way that the microphone gets so close when the horses are grazing, and the other animals are grazing, when the pigs are eating the acorns, and even some of the characters, some of the people in the film talk about the delight of the sounds. So it was like a sensory delight all around. But I just love how it begins with that quote from the UN Convention on Biodiversity about what we've done to the earth, which is not dissimilar from the quote of mine that you just shared, Esther, about human folly. But what humans have done to the earth is no less than a massacre of the other species. We start with that stark truth. And the fact is, Ana, the biologist on the panel, can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that biodiversity has declined alarmingly in the half century. And 50 years, more than 25,000 species. We're talking about a third of those known species that are known in danger of disappearing. And so you have this film. I just think it's a beautiful piece of storytelling about that's positive, about the possibilities for restoration. I appreciate the distinction that Greta made about rewilding versus restoration as well. I've written a little bit about rewilding in Staten Island post Hurricane Katrina. And, that's where you kind of let the land revert without human intervention. Here you have humans participating in the ecosystem. And I thought the movie was also a very loving portrayal of labor, like what hands can do when they come together to work for harmony among species. And I'll just finish by saying I really appreciated how there was as much attention paid to the animals in this. There was as much time that the camera lingered on animals as it did on, human faces speaking about what they were doing, maybe even more. And so just a really quiet way we would spend time with, owls landing on a perch on a fence, right? Or what were the animals with the ringtail, Greta, who were,
those are an animal that only exist in this part of Spain. They're called genet, and of course they're threatened. They do a lot of, they have to monitor them. Yeah, and so they have a little hide, like a bird hide, and you can watch them. They only come out, they're night animals.
Yeah,
I was so sick when I filmed that. I couldn't believe I was like, I had a cold. I was literally shivering, freezing cold. And I was like, I have got to get these animals. But I think it worked out well.
I'm glad you did. And I mean, it was delightful to see them doing their thing, but also the sound of them, like licking the bark to get I imagine they were eating insects. But I loved the amount of love there was kind of transmitted through your appreciation for the labor these humans were doing in their respect for the animal world that came through. It was really a treat to watch on Earth Day. And then the quote I think I really will take away and almost want to use as an epigraph for a book or an article is whatever you love, you want to protect. And that's all. Yes, that's true for all of us.
I fell in love with him.
Yeah, of course.
I fell in love with this man. Well, I just want to pick up the sound. Speaking of human labor, the sound. The second time I went with a legendary cameraman, Tom Hurwitz, and I had an assistant camera who was a Spanish woman called Laura Cepan, and a young sound recorder from Havana who lived in Madrid, Sergio. And Sergio had a visceral reaction of love to the audio, and he was just magical. And then he went, and then I did the sound mix with him. I was like, he has to be at the sound mix. So I went to Galicia in Spain to where he mixes, and we did the sound. So I really appreciate that you appreciate that, because we spent a lot of time and effort and money, and he's just astounding.
Well, I'd like to say before there are a couple of questions that come to mind listening to you. But first, I'd like to hear Anna's opinion, and as a scientist in watching it. But one thing that hadn't crossed my mind before that Emily brought up was, where did you get that music? It was very Spanish, and it fit in.
It's actually Philip Glass, and I decided to add music very late in the edit because I love that it's called Metamorphosis, and it is human voice. And that's the other thing, that being in the location, and it's like you just all the time you go, okay, there is no doubt that humans created music from nature, because every animal and all the species and all the different variations within the animal world are an instrument. And so this idea of using the human voice as a chorus was just, and he has to prove anything. He has an agent, of course, but anything that anytime you use his music, he personally approves the project, and he gave us a really nice, sweet deal. So yeah.
Very important in film world, yes. One thing before we get to Anna that I do think I should mention to those who have joined us is that we've just seen the first 10 minutes of the film. I hope a lot of you have watched it before coming to join our conversation. But some of the things that both Emily and Greta have mentioned show up further on in the film, the vultures and the animal that intrigued me very much too, that sort of cross between a raccoon and a squirrel that you just said the name of, that I've forgotten already. So they were talking about things that are in the movie, but you're not imagining that you didn't just see them. Okay, Anna, what was your reaction watching this?
It's so interesting because the way that I work with biodiversity is I work in very to the extent that they exist, less managed ecosystems. So when I do my research, we're camping in the forest, away from lots of activity or management. And when I saw your movie, it really became very clear to me that this is probably a much more efficient way to bring biodiversity to the general public, because this is so much closer to people's realities, right? It's about living. It's about coexisting. It's how you respect nature and keep development going and keep feeding people. And it was really important to me because I have to tell you, Greta, scientists are horrible at communicating their science, right? So with this movie, really, I think what got me very excited was that it was this sense of relief that, oh, really, this is Greta. She totally gets it. And she's doing such a wonderful job getting this message across, right? It's, as Emily was saying, it's poetic, but it's also filled with information, right? It has this nice mix of the science and the humanity of it. So to me, that was a winning line there that oftentimes the pure scientists miss, right? It was humanizing this encounter. That's what you were doing. That is so beautiful, so effective, and so what we need, right? It's what the world really needs, is this learning to deal with these two sides.
Well, one thing I'd like to go back to, obviously the three of you are very passionate about this issue, and I'm sure a lot of the people who have joined us chose to do so because they too have strong feelings about this. But even a lot of people who will look at a beautiful place like Azaba and look at these animals and feel for what we know is happening out there. Maybe this is just my ignorance, but I'd really like each of you to explain what the actual word biodiversity means. People who are involved in it know it, but it's not really a household word. So I just like to know, if someone walks up to you who's a perfectly bright person, and you threw this word out there and they said, what's that? How would you define it? What would you say? Let's start with Greta.
I would do an probably very unscientific. I would just say it's a sum of all life on Earth. and all life interacts all the time, whether you know it or not. And one example that I like to give that is really simple is take the monarch butterfly. Every animal has a food source and a nesting and a habitat habit. We live in heated apartments with hot water. Most of the world doesn't, but that's our habitat. And the monarch butterfly has one habitat, and that is something called milkweed. But we have destroyed the habitat of milkweed, and we are massacring the butterflies because of it. So my point being that everything has a place and everything matters. And that's, to me, biodiversity.
Okay, Emily, how would you, if someone just said to you, what is that word that you just said? What's biodiversity?
I don't know that I can improve upon that and defer, of course, to Ana, the biologist, to really talk about this. But I will say, I think what Greta just shared about interconnection is a really important part of the word biodiversity, the sum of all life. But also, and the movie gets at this too. One of the characters says, sometimes we're asked, when there's so much human suffering, why are we, so focused on wildlife conservation? And his answer is really good. I won't spoil it, but he talks about how, interconnected we are with each other. Humans are part of this ecosystem, and the biodiversity, like, it's good for all of us that we're thriving. Something that Greta also mentioned, I wonder if she could touch on this too. She mentioned it in the dress rehearsal for tonight, was that even before the term biodiversity came into parlance, we discovered that became sort of part of the common parlance in the 1980s. This is an understanding and a philosophy that has existed, especially in Native cultures, forever, right? It's not a new term, even though we haven't really been using that term for all that long in the West.
Not a new concept, you mean?
Yes, it's not a new concept.
Yeah. Ana, you are the scientist. You were saying scientists don't always communicate to the rest of the world. How if someone said, "What do you do, lady?" What is this
But you know what?
biodiversity?
It's interesting because Greta said, I'm going to use a definition that is not scientific. And what she said is exactly what we tell our students. Biodiversity is the diversity of life on Earth, which was pretty much, these were her words, right? But what it's interesting is that we also want our students to have a very broad understanding of the multiple dimensions that are embedded in this life that we call life, right? So lots of people just think of biodiversity as short for biological diversity, and they think of species, the different kinds of animals, the different types of plants, right? Those are the species. We are species, the human species, for instance, and there are many other species. Actually, we think that there are 1 trillion species out there that we share our planet with. And look at our impact on all of them. We have not described all of them. We're far from knowing all of them and where they are, but we think they exist. But we are really interested in making our students understand that this diversity is not only of species, it's also, for instance, of the genes that each species carries. So biodiversity also includes genetic diversity, right? The diversity of the backbone of the elements that make us alive and make us adapt, right? It also is the diversity of ecosystems. So, I got from a species and I went micro into the gene, but you can also get the species and go macro into the ecosystem. Ecosystem diversity is also biodiversity. So it's this very complex, system of elements, and they're ever lasting, bigger and bigger, that allow the planet to function, right? Together.
Okay. Now, Greta, you mentioned, and it's true, we New Yorkers, City College of New York is where we happen to be affiliated with, mostly do live in apartments with our heating and all the rest. So how is it? And there's been a lot of talk about Aboriginal people, meaning people in, I guess, non-Western, who come from non-Western societies. How did this place in Spain, in Europe, come to become so aware of
Well,
this
well,
issue?
the Dehesa is a when we talk about human intervention, the Dehesa was created by humans in a, like 5,000 years ago, where they they began to understand that the value of the oak trees in terms of holding water, providing food for themselves and the animals, nesting place for birds. As a matter of fact, the Catholic kings actually at one point said, the Dehesa, the land of the Dehesa, the landowners can do animal husbandry and collect the acorns, but the king or the queen owns the trees. We own the trees, so it was like no cutting. You couldn't cut them down or whatever. Um, but I mean, so it was only in the 70s when the misnamed Green Revolution of all these chemicals were being used to do like the opening scene where they have the wheat, which is grown with huge amounts of water and chemicals, and then they cut it and dry it and feed it to these tragic cows who are kept enslaved in these small places, and then that enabled us to have cheap meat and all that blah blah blah. But the it was, I mean, one of the things I tried to find the balance of in the film, because one thing that really, there is kind of a genre of natural history, which is usually a great man goes out and has a brilliant idea and fights David, it's a David and Goliath story, and creates his, this saves the elephant or saves the tiger or whatever. But what I wanted to do was to show that that's not what it's about. It's about, as I think Emily said, it's about a collective will to want to live in harmony with the rest of the bloody world. And so I'm digressing. I do that sometimes. You can direct me back to the point. But there was a phrase that I learned when I was there, which I absolutely loved, and it's from the folklore. It says, "You plant vines for your children. You plant wheat. No, you plant wheat and crops for yourself. You plant vines for your children, and you plant oak for your great grandchildren." So they had this idea of a cycle, and when you planted what. But what was the key part of the question? I'm sorry.
How it
Oh
is
yeah.
that
So,
this
so what
place in
happened?
Europe, it was located in Europe.
Okay, so it was
Yeah.
until the 70s, and the economy changed and they started to do, what they call modern farming. And then what happened was they lost biodiversity in some places, but in the places where they weren't doing that, the biodiversity thrive. So there are thousands of species that only exist in Western Spain. And Carlos, as a child, would go and that's where they summered, in that area down near
Can you
Santander.
remind people who Carlos is?
Carlos Sanchez is the lead character, the president of the foundation. And in the 80s, he founded a foundation which operates out of Santander in the north. But then he actually, a Swiss guy, wanted to do something. He wanted to do a really big thing in conservation. And so Carlos bought an abandoned pig farm, animal pit, where they had, hundreds and hundreds of pigs and were messing everything up. So he bought it and he started that. It's only like now it's probably 10 years old. So he was the initial driving force. And
I'm sorry, started what, Greta? He had all these pigs, and what did he do with them?
No, well, the pigs were slaughtered and sold off, and he just, they just had the land. So that's how they started it. But, as I say, it's like when I said people created it, they brought in animals, they brought in crops, but they didn't mess everything up. You know, they knew, okay, the birds come in the spring and they nest in these trees. We're not going to trim the trees in the spring, which because in the 70s and the 80s, it became about humans, and the humans would be like, well, we're going to trim the trees now because that's when we want to trim them, you know? So it's not, a lot of it is reclaiming deep knowledge that has been erased.
So you're talking about human intervention that harms the environment versus what we can do to turn that around, to bring it
Yes,
back. Am I
yes.
right? That is what you're saying. One thing that struck me, again, we've just seen the beginning of the film, but further on in the film, and we saw one such worker, I was very impressed by seeing the people who work to bring about the goal that you're talking about, to save some of these species, to bring things back to the way they would have been if people weren't showing up doing the things that they do. There is one point when Carlos was Martinez, wasn't it? The man who runs this place, this huge reserve, brings to the reserve a whole group of farmers and ranchers who don't really like what's going on there, you know, after we've heard how beautiful everything is. And when you think about it, people who object here in the States, let's say, to the regulations about the environment, it's usually for economic reasons. It's usually business that's being harmed. It's maybe people who own big farms or whatever. And here in this very rural part of Spain, we see the same thing. The local farmers and ranchers are not crazy about some of the things that are going on that change the kind of grass that maybe fattens up the animals they're raising to bring to market and all of that. And that really struck me, where the workers that show up every day, this very unusual stuff that's going on, is just another day's work for them. You have many scenes where they're just saying, well, we have to do this with the rabbits, or
one of the things that is very important for Carlos is that these are large well, what do you call ranch in Spanish? Ana, what's a ranch? Fincas. So that they're very large fincas, and most of them have been owned by the same families for, you know, eons, right? But a lot of the people who owned the land didn't want to be farmers anymore, so they went to the city and they just left the land. But other ones stayed with the especially if you're a jamon producer, that's a huge, big business.
Yes.
Very expensive it is. It's more expensive than cocaine per ounce. And not that I know anything about that. But anyway, so what he's trying to do is he has all these programs, like when they go out, you see it when we go around with oh my God, I forget his name, but when we go around to the ponds, following the ponds, and they're monitoring the ponds, and those are all on other people's land, other ranches, other fincas, and what they're doing is modeling. You could say my whole film is modeling, and what they're doing is modeling, and then what happens is in the farm and see, oh, this little area the cows can still drink, but they don't shit in the pond and kill all the life. Like it's a continual process. And as he says in the film, he's like, thousands and thousands of acres have been joined by his just, you know, bringing people into the fold through seeing that the best practices work for their needs.
But how about the workers that are at Azaba? Were they trained? Were they taught? They come out of ideological belief, or is it just it's a good job and they learn what they're supposed to do?
Well, like Patricia has a degree in forestry. Juan is a local guy who just has incredible amount of knowledge. He's the one who argues with the other farmer who's part of the project. They just, you know, it's an ongoing, it's an always evolving understanding of what's best practices. And then the other people are like, they're hired. I mean, it's jobs. It's the EU there's a program in the European Union called the LIFE program, and people apply for money, and so they got some, they get the salaries to pay the actual workers. Oh, and there's a lodge you can go after COVID. You can go and stay at the lodge, and it's just a wonderful experience. And then they sometimes slaughter animals so you can eat the incredible wild boar and horses and cows when they have, because there's only a limit. They've been so successful with reproduction that sometimes they have to harvest them because there's they have to keep the balance of how many animals are on the space.
Yes. Well, that reminds me when you were talking about human intervention that way, that not all of as beautiful as what we see is, not everything in nature is beautiful. You mentioned the vultures before, and they're sort of nature's sanitation department in a sense. We see, I recall seeing in Mexico a town where the vultures had their wings clipped, and they were waddling around a village, eating, I don't know, iguanas and things. It was kind of horrible, but with people not around, you show that here in a different form. You show the vultures are free and they're flying around, but then we see a horse skeleton at one point, and that it was left there and it was picked clean, and that too is nature. So I wonder if you wanted to comment on that.
You want to say something about that, Ana?
Yeah.
I just want to defend the vultures. They're beautiful and they're super relevant, right? So they are part of the cycle of recycling matter and energy. And so they may be ugly looking for you, but they're very relevant. So in that sense, in the film, I thought it was pretty brilliant that they were including them as protagonists as well. They are part of this cycle of life here,
doing things the natural way, in other words.
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, there are cultures that actually have them central to aesthetics and beliefs, and no, they are absolutely part of it. I mean, right?
In Nepal, they leave people out on raised platforms for the vultures.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, it's everything is relative to your own culture.
Exactly.
Okay, Emily, did you have anything to say about that?
I just wanted to add, on the topic of vultures, there's this beautiful mural. I just wrote a long piece about these Audubon mural projects around City College. There's all these murals that are coming up, and they represent birds that are endangered due to climate change. And there's one local artist named Marta Alicia Matarrita who chose the vulture to represent, and she painted it on a storefront gate that rolls down over, like security gate. But she did two vultures, and she wrote, misunderstood bird. So.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean to sound like an anti-vulture bigot. I just
no, we totally got it.
As an example that not everything in nature, I guess, is beautiful to the human eye, the lovely scenery we saw, but it's all, as you said, part of the cycle. It is literally taking care of things naturally. Wasn't this project, what are some of the projects in the States, Anna? Weren't there goats being used right here in New York?
Well, we have, you mean projects of managing biodiversity?
Yes, balancing the species.
Yeah, I mean, there are several, right? I mean, we have projects managing biodiversity. National Parks does a lot of it. One of the examples that really come to mind to me and that we have our students working on is fire maintenance, right? So fire suppression has been an issue for a long time, and fire has this really aggressive, issue that people are afraid of fires, right? So people put away fires very easily because of how close we are to nature in some of these areas, right? And but fires are essential to several ecosystems. They keep species in check, right? They keep the balance, the interactions balanced. Fires prevent lots of species, some species from spreading out and having lots of biomass, lots of wood. So for the longest time, when people were avoiding fires, every once in a while, there was going to be a big fire, and that would be a big thing and a big problem for the system and for the people around the system. So there are lots of programs that manage fires, and they light fires on purpose, and they have them controlled. So it's pretty much, similar. There's a practice in the US that is very similar in essence to what Greta is talking about, of managing ecosystems. Humans trying to see, how can I facilitate these interactions in a way that they can go on their own, but that I'm allowing biodiversity to restore itself or to maintain itself the way it would naturally be doing. So fire management is one big example.
Well, for example, in John Muir, when he was a very important environmentalist and a man of his times, racist, and especially against Native peoples, and he would say, we have all this untamed land, but actually the Native people are like, this isn't untamed. We have crops, we have animals, we're living here. What, it's just like, it's all about, again, what perspective you're coming from.
Well, Anna, you are active in that you're studying biodiversity, you're studying the different species and how to balance everything and what role they play. And Greta and Emily have approached this through creativity, through getting the world out in different ways. And I wanted to ask Emily, when I had quoted you before, the article I had read, I think you had brought one of your children to the Museum of Natural History. And I'm wondering whether that is what inspired you, what inspires you to use your writing. You were already a prolific writer about many other subjects, to bring your writing to this topic.
Yeah, probably at the base of it is parenthood, actually, caring about stewardship, because I, want to take care and participate as an activist, or being as educated and aware as I am about these issues for the sake of my children. And that's honestly, that's at the root of it. So the piece that you're referring to, the doorway for me was, grappling with thinking about hurricanes, and in particular Hurricane Sandy and its effect upon New York City, and the ways that we are at risk as a coastal city, how that might affect my children, but not only that, how climate change is affecting us already.
Okay, climate change is not something we've discussed because we've been talking about the film and biodiversity. Anything the rest of you have to say about that? Anna, as a scientist of biodiversity, does climate change come into this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, climate change comes about in multiple ways. I mean, we have biodiversity because life evolved on Earth, and life evolved a lot in response to climate change. So climate change is not something that it's new. It's not something that it's only generated by humans. There's been changes in climate, affecting life since the beginning of life, 3.5 billion years ago, right?
Ice Age.
But life has been biodiversity has been responding to these changes, right? Some species go extinct, some species shift where they are, other species adapt, new species emerge, they arise, they're generated. But humans have been pushing the speed of this change in the climate, right? So the problem is not new, the issue is not new, the problem is the velocity of climate change, and we are speeding up this climate change now. And that is something that the biodiversity is not used to. It didn't evolve for billions of years at this pace of climate change, right? So suddenly this change is much higher than it was before in a very limited time frame. And it's not only climate, it's not just climate, because we are changing climate, but we're also changing the land, which is really something that Greta is focusing. So I want to bring those because they go really together.
And weather,
it's the climate and the land use. Go ahead, Greta.
Yeah, and weather patterns change. Which
Yeah,
is
weather
not
is
exactly
reflecting climate,
change.
of course.
For example, I mean, with the fact that they have the most ancient species of animals on the thing, on the reserve, is because they want to preserve these species because they can withstand many more dramatic changes in diet and climate than the ones that we breed, genetically breed, and can only be fed a certain thing, like to create the most milk or the most beef or whatever. And it snowed at the reserve. Carlos sent me pictures. The first time in his life, he's like 60. The first time it ever snowed in that part of Spain, and he sent me pictures, and I'm like, oh my God, did the animals survive? He said yes. They survive. Yeah, they survive. So, it's a kind of strategy. I just want to remind people, if they have questions, put it in the Q&A, and pretty soon we'll start answering questions, taking questions.
Yes, let's see what the audience has to say. I think that JT can read it out.
Yeah, so one question from someone was about how she had resolved to go back to being vegan and was surprised to see meat products served and consumed at the closing party award celebration. Could you comment on the meat dairy consumption in light of what's shown in this film?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that someone else, it's all about profit driven things, right? So if you can eat meat, if you eat meat that's been grown sustainably, that, if you are a meat eater, there are ways to raise pigs, chickens, goats, animals, to eat them that doesn't fuck up the rest of the world, excuse my French. And as I said, I had some really good meat at the reserve. Matter of fact, when I came back from the vulture thing, but they don't have chickens. They do buy chickens, but from a, local, they don't call it organic. They just call it local with, but we came back from the vultures and they were grilling chicken. I was like, oh my God, okay. It was a little hard right then. But yeah, of course, the dairy industry, the meat industry, all industry. I mean, if anything, this film should make you want to be a socialist, I'll tell you that. Because that's what's driven all of this insanity, is this unfettered capitalism. And of course, the jamon. I have hardcore vegetarian friends in Spain, and they say, except for jamon, because it melts in your mouth. You can get it over at the, you can buy it at a few places in New York, and it's extraordinary to eat an animal that only ate acorns its whole life.
Another person asked, were the starving animals fed or allowed to die?
Well, did you see a skeleton in the vulture hide a little later? They were allowed to die. They had a lot of the horses reproduce really well. There are many horses, but they let them die. Sometimes they feed. But you see in the opening scene where the guy is carrying a bag of food for these bowls, these ancient cow O'Rourke's, they're the closest to O'Rourke, which was driven to extinction in the 1600s. You see the O'Rourke's in beautiful paintings, European oil paintings from that era. But anyway, they did feed them when they first came because they're really, really expensive, and to transport them. And I was like, Carlos, you're feeding them? And he's like, I can't afford to let them die. So now they reproduce well, and sometimes they eat them.
Another question was it difficult to finance this film?
Impossible. I didn't really get it financed. I went in April 2014, I went, and October 2015, I went, and I just invested my own like $15,000. I just said, I want to make this movie. And then I thought for sure I would get grants. I didn't get any bloody grants. And then I got invited to do a fellowship at the Rachel Carson Center in Munich. And that came with a stipend, and I just lived really, really frugally. And so I could fly to Spain and do 2 more shoots and hire I started using a Spanish camera woman who had been the assistant, so she knew the style. And Sergio, my darling, who's kind of like my son now. And we went twice from that. And then while I was at Rachel Carson Center in Munich, I learned I got a global Fulbright to go and look at restoration in 3 cultures: Spain, Australia, and India. So then I had 3 months in Spain, and I lived very frugally, and I was able to pay my crew. So, and then I edited it, and then I got an ISCA grant, and I could pay to, the finishing costs for the sound mix and all the technical stuff that happens. But I edited it myself for a year, and it didn't get paid because I couldn't raise money. It's, again, natural history has a genre, and this doesn't fit it. So, but I'm glad I did it. I'll earn it through sales, over the course of its life.
I was just about to ask, is there any hope of the larger world seeing this film? Any distributors out there?
Yeah, Kino Lorber is distributing it. They're releasing it in June, because in June is the launch of the UN Decade for Ecological Restoration. So it's gonna be tied into that. It'll be on all the it won't be on, it'll be on everything, iTunes, Kino Lorber, whatever.
Now, do the people in Azaba have much contact with other people interested in the environment, or have they created their own little world?
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. They have partnership with a reserve that's in Portugal, right? Because it's almost in Portugal.
Yeah.
And then there are scientists from the University of Santander who are part of, the science aspect of planning it. And then Carlos, they work together. We're going to screen the film at the Society for Ecological Restoration in June International Conference. So that'll start to bring it on. I'd love it. Like, PBS is not going to touch this. It's too weird.
Why not?
Well, because you have to have like a man narrating it, and then a score to tell you how to feel. And they say you're spending so much time on those ugly vultures. It would be a bad chance in hell that I got a commercial distributor.
Well, it wasn't just the vultures. I must say, a friend of mine who saw it commented on the starving horses. So there were various things that
They're very disturbing.
may be hard to take, but they're reality.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there was a really interesting article in the Atlantic magazine about the problem with nature documentaries is that they're not natural.
Oh, you mean it's nice?
They're not about, they're sort of about nature, but they act like these places just exist on their own, and there's nothing around, there's no whatever. Really interesting piece if you're interested in that problem of commercialization.
I'd like to say Ana gets the word out to people about this through her scientific work, and we think of this as scientific or political, Earth Day and all of the environmental activism. But both Greta and Emily have approached this through creativity, through the arts. And I wanted to hear each of you say the role that you see the arts playing in getting, let's say, well, we're talking about this, so let's stick to this particular message. Getting the word out that this is an issue.
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, Ana herself said scientists aren't the best at communicating what they're doing. That's probably not true for all scientists, but I think, like, whether or not that's even true, I just feel like the state of crisis that we're in terms of what we need to be doing collectively to restore the earth is so urgent that we need all kinds of storytelling, and people respond to different kind of messaging, right? Like, some people do respond to that kind of score and the male narrator, right? Like, some people.
No, a lot of people.
Right?
Did they say that to you at PBS? Did they say it had to be a male narrator?
No, but I'm saying I just think as many of us as possible at this stage in the game need to be telling the story in whatever way, moves our own heart to connect with other hearts, because it's so urgent that we work on restoration together.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that they've just posted a link of how you can work that when the film is released in June. But like, if you're part of an organization or a university and you want to host something like this, we can arrange that for,
Well, where can people get in touch with you to do that?
Well, so there's a link right there, Kino Lorber, and if you write to you can contact info@jezebel.org or write to Kino Lorber, and they'll
Could you spell that out, like biodiversity?
It's in the discussion chat.